Excellent. Oh, you can hear me. Brilliant. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a fun time. Now, I've just realized if I don't put a stand up, I'm going to be walking everywhere and I might give everybody vertigo, but it's okay. A big hello from all of us at this Wildwood Church get-together. If you're a visitor with us today, you are so welcome. You are really welcome. It's great to see so many people here. My name is Raj, and I'd like to briefly welcome you, if you like, with a few thoughts as to why we think this sort of getting together, belonging, if you like, is so important. I hope you're enjoying it so far. There was a book that we used to read in primary school. I used to read in primary school, and it was called the All Better book. It looked something like this. Oh, well, it'll come up eventually. And it had the world's hardest questions in them all. And these questions were answered in the book by little kids. Fascinating. Questions like, how do we stop destroying the planet? This is a long time ago, remember? I know I only look 23, but this was a long time ago. How do I stop my mum and dad from smoking? That was one of the questions. How do we make our houses earthquake-proof? And a 4-year-old, there was another question, how do we find happiness? And a 4-year-old answered like this: run under a garden sprinkler on a very hot day. I might try that later. The toughest question of all, though, was this that we read. I remember it very clearly. It said, with billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely, ... What do you suggest? Here's a few answers from these little kids. Max, age 9, he said, make food that talks to you when you eat. For instance, it would say, how are you doing? What would you like to do today? Good idea. How about this answer? This is a good one. From a guy called Matthew. He was 8 years old. And he says, we could get people a pet or a husband or a wife and take them places. Good idea. One of my favorite authors, a Christian author, a guy called Dallas Willard, he wrote this: God's aim in human history is the creation of an inclusive community of loving persons, you and me, with himself included at the very center. And you see, folks, that's what the church is meant to be. That's what you're getting a glimpse of here, if you like. And my story is how a group like this changed my life. I'm a doctor. I also help oversee a church on the other side, the dark side of the world. No, T-side. Yeah. And I've been in that church now for 25 years. But before being in that church, before sort of coming to faith, if you like, I thought church was a place where people went to deliberately get bored. That was my view. You see, I was brought up in a Hindu family. We lived in a pretty deprived part of town where Benefit Street was filmed, if you remember that Channel 4 series. I was part of a close-knit Indian community, having festive religious parties all the time. We knew how to have fun in a religious setting, not like some of the churches that I sometimes went to. Shh. As I got older, however, I started reading the mythology and all the writings of the famous holy men of Hinduism. It seemed okay to me at the time, good teaching about morals and things. There was also gripping stories of gods with more than 2 arms riding into battle on a rat. You think Lord of the Rings was good, you should have heard the stories that my mum read to me at bedtime. We never got to sleep. But the more and more I looked deeper at it, eventually I concluded, personal view, that a personal God wasn't to be found. A God that I could relate to wasn't to be found in the Hinduism that I was brought up in. Over the following years, I went to college and then to medical school down in London and Manchester. I found a new freedom away from my parents, and in all that distraction, if you like, spiritual things became a bit of a blur. The God and goal of my life suddenly became pleasure and status and selfish romance and drink. I did what I wanted to do. Increasingly, I saw myself as pretty invincible. I was a doctor, top social class ranking, don't you know? I was confident. What was more noble than caring for and looking after the needs of the sick? Why on earth did I need God? In fact, when I thought about it, he needed me. Look at all the suffering in the world. As you can see, arrogance and pride was kicking in big. And when I look back on all of that, really, my kind of reflection of that is that I was a very young man running fast up a hill and not realizing that the cliff ahead of me that I was about to fall over. And when the longer you live, we all realize that there's a cliff approaching us at any time. If COVID has taught us nothing else, we realize that we are not invincible. And maybe we're not in control as what we think we are. And so suddenly, in the haze of a few months, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 50. I was in my 20s, and she died within a few weeks. Also around the same time, my brother Robin one day decided to end it all with a goodbye note in the glove box. Suddenly, I'd lost everything I loved. Even though Dad was still around, I felt lonely often in a crowd. I'd lost the most precious thing to me, family. Suddenly, that question I read as a child came back to me. It became real. With billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely. Subsequently, depression kicked in and a downward spiraling lifestyle of drugs and alcohol and me-satisfying selfish relationships. I was out of control, a slave to bad choices, totally addicted, in a mess. I was working as a doctor during all of this turmoil. Can you imagine it? Yet, in the midst of all that turmoil, friends, quite surprisingly to me, definitely, God turned up. A doctor friend of mine called Liz, she invited me to a church gathering a bit like this, called Alpha. It was a safe place where I could ask and discuss some of the big questions of life. Why am I here? How do I find happiness? Why is there so much suffering in the world? If there is a God, what on earth is he doing? These evenings were precious to me. There was time to stop and think and question and breathe. And then one morning, after a few weeks of Alpha, I remember sitting in the middle of an early morning service. It was an Anglican church that I was going to then. Their early morning service, there was no bells and whistles, there was no smoke machines and electric guitars. Yeah, none of that. That morning, with tears rolling down my eyes, God intervened. God showed me his love in the person of Jesus Christ, who I could meaningfully relate to. God revealed to me Jesus' holiness, that he was a just and righteous God, and next to him, I definitely wasn't. That was the diagnosis, if you like, that the arrogant Dr. Saha needed to hear. Back then, I thought churches were for white people who were good. I was neither. I needed a savior. In that church in York, I took the biggest step of faith in my whole life. I decided to put my life in God's hands. He showed me his love and his forgiveness for all the terrible things that I had done well before I had any time to put them right. He showed me mercy when I felt ashamed. He took my deserved place on the cross as I walked free. He gave me the motivation and the joy and the power to change. But most of all, he put me into a family again, the church. And do you know what? It wasn't boring at all. It was actually really good fun, a bit like what's happening today. Together, as the church, there was purpose. I saw things around me that with his help and with my brothers and sisters and my mums and dads in the church, with their help, I could make a difference. This church community introduced me not to a set of rules and regulations, but actually to a wonderful person who changed my life and the lives of lots of the people around me. We were all in this together. We were all journeying together. With billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely. What do you suggest? Well, I suggest the church, friends. I suggest the church. The Bible tells us because of the joy awaiting Jesus, he endured the cross, disregarding shame. That's what it says. Listen, the point of that is that you were the joy that awaited Jesus as he endured the cross. You. With billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely. Do you know what? Someone already did. And his name is Jesus, my God. And that's who I discovered on this journey together in a gathering just like this. And I thank God that my life didn't go absolutely pear-shaped, but actually with the help of my brothers and sisters, just like a lot of you have experienced, God made a difference. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.